I was gonna let folks know what happened.
Okay. How about we make it a 6.5 on the schedule?
Okay, that sounds good.
Have the squeaky chair again.
All right. I'd like to call this meeting of the Lafayette Planning Commission to order. Could we have a roll call, please?
Joe,
Here.
Michael, Carl,
Here.
Ron Kerr,
Here.
Brianne Carpenter,
Here.
Michael Shaw,
Here.
George Larson,
Here.
and Doreen Van Tine is absent.
Okay. Has everybody read the minutes from yesterday, or from last month?
Yes.
Yeah.
And does anybody have any questions or comments or needs to make any adjustments to this?
Not for this one?
Anybody? Okay, would anybody like to approve the minutes? Make a
I move
motion?
that the minutes be approved as submitted.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I abstain.
All right. Okay. Public comments on items not in this agenda. Okay, is the next part of the agenda. And do we,
That's if anybody that's attending has anything that they'd like to add to the agenda.
Nope.
okay.
Okay.
Can I ask a couple housekeeping things? Is it appropriate?
Sure, if the chair recognizes you.
Yes.
And
A couple of meetings ago, I think it was Ron, requested the use of a whiteboard that raised a question, during hearings and testimony and deliberations. When is it appropriate and when is it not appropriate to use a whiteboard?
the appropriateness partially, well, it could be appropriate at any time. The mechanics of it is, if this material that goes on the whiteboard is entered into the record of a hearing, then, okay, somebody's got to copy that down, or we, at the end of the hearing, we take that off, saw it into pieces and put it in the file so that we know what was entered into the record.
Can you not take a photo of it?
Yeah, a photo could be done. I just kind of went to one end of the spectrum, but sometimes people with a whiteboard, they'll put up something, and as the testimony or discussion is going on, then they'll take away some of what they put in and put on another thing. They line through something because they decide, no, that's not really hitting the nail on the head, and then they add something. And so it's better if people are going to testify that they be prepared. And one of the items in your Planning Commissioner training materials talks about how people can be prepared. And it's in there so that you will have some idea as to hopefully what people will have done to prepare to come to you and tell you what's on their mind. Unfortunately, that usually isn't what happens. Often testimony is just kind of comes to their mind the minute they start to testify, and sometimes it can be a bit disjointed and even rambling, and you have to kind of figure out what their concern really is.
Well, that can happen without a whiteboard.
Right, and so
But
with a
I'm looking-
whiteboard, it's just part of the testimony, and it's problematic unless somebody, I suppose, like Brianne suggested, takes a picture of it.
Yeah.
And then that gets put in the record.
So it sounds like the use of a whiteboard is a maybe.
I believe what you're asking, he asked about the whiteboard after the public hearing had already closed.
Yes, that is
So
correct.
in order to use the whiteboard with new information, the public hearing would need to be reopened. So not that it couldn't be, but at the time he asked, the hearing had already been closed.
Yeah, but we were into deliberations, and I think what Ron wanted to do was either clarify, or be able to present it visually, since the documentation was in chart and diagram form, was in error. And so there was a lot of discussion back and forth of what were we talking about?
Right.
And
A visual picture could have presented the information in a
Yes.
summation in a way that did not deviate from what had already been presented in the record and what already existed,
yes.
but would easily clarify and
No.
tie into the language that had already been used. So, yeah, in that case, I would say a
Yeah, the time to
drawing,
do that
a
is,
picture, and a picture would have tied it together.
I
the
don't see much
time to
difference
do
in
that
when
is
we
by,
use the
in
map
the
of
hearing, ask the applicant to better explain the confusing material that they turned in with their application, rather than wait till deliberation, and then you, as a decision maker, kind of taking on the role of the applicant to explain what the request really is. It's your role to determine if the application materials show compliance with the approval criteria. The burden of proof is on the applicant. And so before you go into deliberation, that is before the hearing is closed, if you have any unclear thoughts about what the applicant is requesting and how that matches up with the criteria, then ask the applicant, what are they really requesting? What, in a clarifying statement, can they say to clear up whatever confusion there might be on any part of any of the commissioners?
Can the commissioners request that the applicants draw it on the whiteboard if it's confusing?
Well, you could. And at that point, then, we'd have to have a camera to take a picture.
I think we all have phones that do that. Thank you, I
Yeah,
appreciate
and,
the clarification.
it's kind of up to the chair, if, the planning commissioners have some issue when the hearing's going on. And, for example, Sir Carl, I'm really confused. I want the applicant to explain clearly what is going on here. And if they need to use the whiteboard, I think we should let them use the whiteboard. And if the commission's fine letting them use the whiteboard, then let them use the whiteboard.
Seems reasonable.
But just be aware, sometimes people that aren't used to drawing things might put something on the whiteboard that's even more confusing. It happens.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. All right. On the next part of the agenda has to do with the electing a chair and a vice chair for this planning commission. The Lafayette Municipal Code requires the planning commission to elect a chairperson at the first meeting in each and every even numbered year. Due to the current vacancy of the chair, commissioners will nominate one of their number and then vote. Chapter 2, Section 2.073 states, chairperson and vice chairperson. If a vacancy of the chair occurs, an election shall be held in the next regular meeting to fill that position. We tried to do this last month, but there wasn't a quorum, so.
Well, there was a quorum, but
But
we
there
wanted to
was
make sure
enough
that there were
members to
other
really.
members here that if they were interested,
Yes.
they could either petition for chair or vice chair, and they'd also be present to hear and participate in the selection, even if they themselves did not seek either role.
Yeah. Okay. Are there any nominations for chair or vice chair?
Can I ask a question?
You may.
Seeing how I'm fairly new to this, wouldn't it be nice to know some of the qualifications of the people that you're putting up for these positions and what their roles are going to be on this commission? So that
I don't think there are
I think
requirements
what
or.
George is asking is, it would be nice to know, and so if someone is nominated, then once all the nominations are in, the chair can ask for each of the people that are nominated to make a statement, something brief
Okay.
that would be about what their background is, what their qualifications might be, and that way people, the commission would have something to base a decision on.
Okay.
Or also, what are the responsibilities of the chair and vice chair?
Basically, you lead the
Because I'm
meeting.
new as well.
That's it. I mean, that's the only one I've seen.
You'll lead and guide the meeting. When the minutes are approved, you'll be responsible for coming in and signing off on the minutes. If we're working on a property development plan where we actually have the plan in front of us, once that plan is reviewed and has been approved, I'll take the subdivision that's currently being put up out on Bridge Street. Once that plat is decided and approved based upon planning commission input, it'll be the chair's responsibility to come in and sign off on that. Basically the chair at that point is serving as the legal representation and the legal voice of the city, saying, verily, this has been through the planning commission, we have reviewed it, and is approved to these standards
Are
and
they really
criteria.
representing the legal voice of the city, or they're just representing the voice of this commission?
Represent the voice of this commission. But
Which
it
will be presented to the city council, and then they'll make the decision.
Well, for example, on the subdivision, and I do the planning for half a dozen cities, so I apologize for not remembering who at the city of Lafayette has to sign a final plat, but someone at the city in a position of responsibility has to sign the plat, and that person or the position is listed in the development code. So if it says the city manager or the mayor or the planning commission chair or the city engineer or even the city planner, whoever is supposed to sign the plat, then once that final plat comes in and the paper copies have been reviewed and redlined, and then the final plat, the 2 copies of Mylar have been submitted to the city for signature, then that person or persons sign representing the city that this final plat is acceptable, it's consistent with the subdivision approval, and then after the city signs, it goes to the county, and the county clerk signs it, the 3 boards of commission members sign it, the county, not assessor, but I don't know, somebody else at the county.
So, for the city of Lafayette, who would that individual be?
Well, I don't remember who in the code is.
It is Preston.
Is
We
it the
just
city
did
manager?
the one- It's Preston.
Okay, it's the city manager then.
Yes.
Some cities, they have 2 people, some 3 people, some 4 people, but it's listed in the development code as to who at the city has to sign a final
So I
plan.
was just kind of curious as to how far this, because I don't know any of these people.
Yeah. And in terms of
For
being
me
a
to
planning
vote-
commission chair,
Can we take a moment to introduce ourselves to each other?
Let's do that.
certainly.
I'm sorry, I missed that.
Can we take a moment to introduce ourselves to each other?
Okay, we can.
I
I'm-
can start,
Please start.
I brought it up.
Yeah.
My name's Jeff Larson, I've lived in this town for approximately 22 years now. Just live up the street across from the old church. Been involved with the community on the water commission and also in the school district for the music program, so I've been involved quite a bit, but not in particular with you guys, so this is new to me, so that's why I'm asking questions, and
That's
it's not
fine.
like we were discussing things that should have been coded already, which sounds like it is,
Okay.
as to how it should be done, so that's why I was wanting to understand.
Michael?
My name is Michael Shaw. Just moved into Lafayette 2.5 years ago. I've been a business owner, a business consultant, and a nonprofit consultant. I've worked with kids in a nonprofit capacity, but as a consultant, I've consulted with boards of directors and on the development of their board functions and procedures, and building good consensus to move an organization ahead. So when I stepped into this role, I wanted to participate in whatever I can do to help move the city of Lafayette forward with great employees.
In part.
In part.
Welcome, gentlemen. I'm Brianne Carpenter. I have been in Lafayette for 8 years now. Grew up in the Tiger Tualatin area. And let's see, I am by trade, I'm a lawyer. Had a private practice focusing on real estate law for a number of years, and now I negotiate contracts for a global tech and science company. And I have 3 kids here in Lafayette, ages 4, 7, and 10. And this is my last planning commission meeting because my term expires next month, and I'm not renewing. So it has been a pleasure.
So vote for you?
What?
So vote for you?
So I made the decision not to renew. It's been a good 4 years. I've enjoyed working with you guys, and it's been lively at times. And, but I am the president of a board of trustees for a nonprofit, and that's taking a lot of responsibility at this time, as well as my other professional and private responsibilities. So.
In other words, your plate is
My plate is very
full
full at the moment.
It's like Thanksgiving dinner with, yeah,
Yes.
got it.
Yes.
Sorry to hear that you're leaving.
No, thank you.
Wish you well, the best. Have fun while you do it.
I shall.
My name is Ron Kerr, and I have been in Lafayette since 2005. I got involved in the Planning Commission out of a desire to help my community grow and hopefully help it grow in the way that it wants to grow. As far as outside work, I've done a number of things, everything from engineering to office work, mail sorting. So, you know, I'm not afraid to roll up my sleeves and get my hands dirty. And I also try to raise the voice of question sometimes everywhere I go. You may remember as a child you're asking your parents why. I still do that. So people get annoyed, usually with a smile on their face. But, you know, I've served on the Planning Commission since I got involved in, I believe it was September of '05, and have been here ever since. So I've kind of seen some of the changes that have come and gone, and try to steer a steady course when I can.
All right. I'm Mike Carl. I'm a retired supervisor from the post office. I asked to come to this planning commission because I wanted to serve my community. It just felt like when I was working, I just had these weird shifts and I never had the chance to serve my community in any kind of respect. So this is my chance to see what I could do to make this a better community for all of us.
I'm Jo Johnson. I'm relatively new to Lafayette. I've been here 5 years. I moved from the opposite side of Portland, from Gresham, where I grew up. And I am an empty nester now. I worked for Portland General Electric for 30 years now. Spent half of that time in wholesale energy trading area of the company. I have not been involved in any form of government, but thought this would be a great way to get involved with the community, with the city, and learn more about everything.
All right. All right.
Well, welcome to our new members. Thank you.
And this is only my second meeting, so.
Thank you for joining us.
Welcome, the fun shall begin
All
shortly.
right. Okay, well, I would like to open the floor to anybody want to make any nominations. And I would also like to mention that this is my last day as the vice chairperson, because I'm not really good at it, to be honest with you. And it's just, the parliamentary procedure is just something I'm not really familiar with. And I'm kind of a wing it kind of guy anyway, versus procedure. So this is my last day as the vice chair. So we need to, somebody needs to nominate a commissioner and a vice chair.
A commissioner?
No.
The chairperson.
Chairperson.
A chairperson?
Chairperson.
Well, if we're nominating, I'll nominate myself
As chairperson?
as chairperson.
And I'll nominate myself as chairperson.
Any self-nominations for vice chair?
Well, we might want to solve the chairperson position first.
Shouldn't you guys say your names so that
My
who's
name,
ever listening?
my name is Ron Kerr, and I nominate myself for chairperson. I'm certainly interested in doing what I can to lead is part of it, but maybe guide would be a better way of putting it, and guide my fellow commissioners. And then when we do have meetings in public here, it's also guide the public through the process as well, so that nobody feels completely disconnected or disenfranchised with what we are trying to achieve for Lafayette, what we're trying to achieve for them, what we're trying to achieve with them.
Would you like to,
Sure.
what would you like to do as chair?
Again, I'm Michael Shaw, and I've served in similar functions, but not with city government. And I believe it is extremely important that the chairperson be the person that sets the guardrails for the things that need to happen, and in such a way that it becomes a painful exercise, and in some cases in futility. With good guardrails and good goals for the commission, then I think a lot of good things can happen. One of my, the first things that I did was I read everything. And one thing that I read was, you know, not only the municipal code, but the zoning and development, but also the comprehensive plan. And as I read through these things, you know, I struggle because much of it is outdated. The comprehensive plan is 42 years old. And so, as chairman, I would like to see, you know, a more proactive commission in making sure that documentation, supportive documentation, required documentation is accurate, it's timely, and it's pertinent.
We're good. So, I'm not too familiar with this procedure.
You'd ask for a vote.
Okay.
How many in favor of candidate 1? How many in favor of candidate 2?
Okay. Okay, I guess we have a show of hands. Ron Kerr for chairman. For Michael Shaw.
I
Okay.
don't know enough to
That's,
really
yeah,
vote.
no, that would be,
Yep, you can abstain.
May I speak to that? For the vote? I'll let you finish the vote, but I want to say something after that.
So, okay, for the record, it shows 4 for Ken,
For Ron.
for Ron Kerr, and 1 for Michael Shaw. So I guess you're the new chairperson,
And 1 abstention.
with 1 abstention, yes.
So I have had many years of experience with Ron, and I feel like Ron, you're going to be able to have good decorum and lead the commission well. I'm really excited, Michael, about your energy coming into the commission, and which is I hope that you I take that and run with it on the commission, because what you said, a lot needs to be updated and reviewed, and that's really great to have that on the commission.
So I guess,
I'll ask if there's any other nominations.
are there any other nominations for?
1 nomination for vice chair, and that would be Michael.
Could we have a show of hands?
Are there any other nominations for vice chair?
Are there any other nominations for vice chair? All in favor? Aye. Let the record show that
Go with that one.
it was unanimous. All right. And excellent. I think from now,
So, Mike,
Dick?
you're all done.
all right, thank you, people.
Now just to move on to the next agenda
Yes,
item.
and that happens to be a public hearing for the accessory dwelling amendments. Jim?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Former Chair.
Technically, isn't he still the chair of this committee, of this meeting?
Well, I don't know exactly what the city's rule is, but if the new chair is going to take over now, then fine. If the new chair is going to take over next month, that's fine.
You
I
can
don't
take
know
it if you'd like.
if there's any issue one way or the other. We're going to have a hearing tonight, so.
That works for me, if you'd like to, Ron.
Okay, I can do that. Public hearing, LA 2021-01, accessory dwelling unit amendments. Purpose of this meeting is to have a public hearing with regard to the work sessions that we have had over several months with changes that need to be made to the ADU. And Jim, can you update us on them?
Yeah, well, the hearing is open, I assume.
The hearing is open.
And so I'd like to enter the staff report into the record and then provide a brief summary of it. For those of you that have been on the commission for a while, you'll probably remember this having come to your attention like in February, I think, of 2020. And then it kind of got waylaid. We had a hearing scheduled and it got waylaid by everything closing down in March of 2020. And so it just kind of sat thinking, well, maybe by summer the COVID would be over. Well, it wasn't. And then fall and winter, and then we came into 2021. And so to get this kind of back on schedule, among other things, the city council had a work session. The city manager thought it would be good for them to know what was going to be coming to them in a few months. And so after that work session, we're having this hearing tonight. And then presumably in January, the city council would have their hearing. So your charge tonight is to hold the hearing, and then, as typical, the back page says what your options are, and presumably you would pass a motion to do one of the options, but you don't have the authority to approve or deny these proposed changes to the city's regulations, because only the city council, the governing body, has the authority to actually approve passing an ordinance, in this case, to change the city's land use planning rules. So I'm, as usual, assuming you've all read this, so I don't want to go through and cover everything that you've already read, but the legislature in the 2017 session passed a bill saying all cities over 2,500 and counties over, I think it was 15,000, had to allow accessory dwelling units on land, and I'll focus on cities now and not mention the counties anymore because they're different with their rural lands and ag lands and forest lands. But all the cities over 2,500 had to adopt regulations to allow accessory dwelling units. The city did that, and it adopted some standards. The bill said that cities can adopt standards, but they need to be reasonable. And so, obviously, because reasonable is a subjective term, some cities adopted none or very few standards for accessory dwelling units. Other cities adopted 10, 15, 20, I don't know how many standards. But around the state, some cities, maybe even many, adopted standards like an ADU has to have a parking space on the property. Some even said you have to have 2 parking spaces. And some cities required that the ADU and the primary dwelling unit on the property would have to be occupied by the owner of the property. They could occupy either one, but they had to be there. So in 2019, I guess it was, the legislature passed the bill again, and they by then had decided that reasonable standards did not include requiring a parking space on the property, and it will not include requiring the owner to live on the property. So Lafayette standards included both of those, and so tonight this is a proposal to delete our parking standard and delete our ownership requirement, because the state law doesn't allow us to do that anymore. And in the meantime, just kind of as a technical thing, this last bill passed by the legislature and signed by the governor was effective this past January. And so had anyone come in during this time, we would have had 2 standards on the books that were not enforceable, and the city would not have enforced them in terms of telling the ADU person that, you know, here's the standards, but don't worry about the parking, don't worry about the ownership. So with that brief summary, and given that we have some people here tonight who probably want to say something about this item, I'm going to end my discussion, and if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer those, or we can move on to the testimony.
I have a question. In reading through the clean copy version, the one thing that I do, just as of course a habit, is sift through it and look for anything that is confusing, ambiguous, unclear, or just hard to understand. At what point would it be appropriate to address those types of issues for the proposed amended language?
I would say that it's up to the commission to decide if they want to have what, and my apologies, I'm an old guy, and so the term mission creep was a pretty big deal in my early life, and it was related to Vietnam, nothing in the Middle East. And so it's easy with code amendments for mission creep to enter in. You know what you need to do, and the proposed language addresses what you need to do, but then people are saying, oh, well, yeah, what about this, or what about that? And all of a sudden, what you started out to do ends up being a small part of what you end up finally doing. So if the commission wants to discuss other things that have been noticed, then that can happen. But I would hope that you would definitely focus on the two changes that have to be made. In this case, because it's related to housing, and there's things like the Federal Fair Housing Act that end up coming down and being applicable to what we do tonight, and then there's the statewide housing effort and the state law that says all housing is needed housing, and needed housing can be subjected to only objective, clear and objective standards. And so when we come into the several standards that the city has already adopted for ADUs, if we propose to amend some standard and it ends up being changed to include subjective language, there's a couple of organizations that monitor, like, well, there's, sorry to have to get into this, but when we make a proposed amendment to our code or our comp plan, including the maps, we send a notice to DLCD, and they have a notice system so that, and I don't know if the people who sign up to see all the notices have to pay a fee or not, but all these changes from all over the state get posted. And so people like the Housing Land Advocates and the Fair Housing Council of Oregon and the State Housing Authority, they, I don't know, weekly or daily or monthly look at the DLCD list, and whenever they see somebody that's going to change their regulations regarding housing, they call up and say, I want to see what your proposed changes are. And so they have been much more active in the last couple of years than they ever were in prior years. And so some of the standards that we have probably don't meet the reasonableness, and there's been some court cases about what is reasonable, and that particular information was in prior information that the commission had at work sessions. And so you have to have your things related to design and siting. And Eugene had a whole bunch of standards, and they just voluntarily said, oh yeah, some of these are definitely not design or siting related, but some of them are. Well, then they got appealed to LUBA, and they found out that some of the standards that they thought were related to design and standards really weren't after LUBA decided. And when that got appealed by the city to the Court of Appeals, the Court of Appeals said, no, Eugene, some of the things you think are related to design and siting aren't, so you have to get rid of those too. So if we stick with our mission and get rid of the two things that we know we have to get rid of, but then open it up and start looking at all these others, then we will open up some standards that we may want to keep. And we get to keep them as long as they're here now. People like the affordable housing folks can't come back and appeal now what we did years ago. And so if we open things up and then amend something or propose to amend something, then they will be able to look at that because we're opening it up. And we may find that something that isn't too bad, but not perfect, and we want to make it perfect, oops, in the process of trying to make it perfect, that opens it up to comments from the affordable housing people, and then if we don't, don't accommodate their concerns, then they can appeal to LUBA, and we would potentially entirely lose that particular option.
You have a question?
Yeah, so Michael, are your suggested changes within the scope of the proposed amendments tonight regarding the proposed the language of the proposed amendments?
No.
Okay. So what I'm hearing is that
It's just more,
more cleanup of the code.
clarification, so there's no ambiguity, because if somebody was reading this and trying to determine, if they should or should not, go ahead with an ADU, then they're gonna be calling some people for answers and interpretation. And so somebody else, another third party, will be reading it and trying to determine, and then what you have is this daisy chain of confusion, because it's the way it's been presented. So my question was, at what point in the process, and I understand the need for moving things ahead to conform to the state, but if that's where it stops, then we're not doing the intent any good. The intent is to be able to give people clear guidelines on what needs to be done to conform to state and city requirements.
So one option you could take is to focus on the proposed changes tonight, and if you, as a commission, want to pass a motion to initiate a text amendment to the development code reviewing all of the ADU standards, then we can initiate that process, or you can initiate it by a motion tonight, and then that would mean we, along with that, probably need to set up a work session, probably not next month, because typically this planning commission never meets in December, but start in January and have a meeting that would include a work session on the ADU standards. That would give everybody a couple of months to read all the standards and see if it makes sense to them, and then be ready in January to come to the meeting and say, hey, I think number 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever, need to be changed, and my concern about 1 is this, my concern about 2 is that, and that way we can just have a typical work session and go through what we don't like and say either let's delete it entirely or make a change to it and keep it, but have it good.
So we can do, so the summary is, we can do what we need to do tonight with this, and if we find that something needs to be adjusted, or we want to adjust something that goes back and impacts the development code, we can initiate that request, we can do that, and as that say, it will automatically roll, it can roll down so that what's done tonight
Meets the law.
meets the requirements,
Yeah, right.
and then change the other, it rolls down, it will change this, and it'll be a seamless
Sure.
thing. Okay.
Okay.
So I think then from going forward, probably the best approach for this is we will have testimony, both proponents and then opponents, so we can gather public input.
Just a
Then-
question on my part.
Yes.
Can I get a better explanation why an ADU is necessary on a normal housing lot?
It's not that it's.
I understand the state law is requiring it.
Yes.
But I'm looking at my house, I sit on the corner, I don't have no backyard to put in a second unit.
It's
But
state
I
law is
can
not
imagine
saying
where
that
it
you
would go
have.
anyway.
State law is not saying that you have to put an ADU, and all state law has done is opened up the possibility to the prospects for those people that have the space, that have the desire to put an ADU on their property, and
What
can do it.
would the ADU be for? So-
Lafayette previously banned ADUs.
What?
The Lafayette previously banned ADUs, which are accessory dwelling units. And state law came in because of the housing shortage crisis in the state of Oregon. And the state came in and made these regulations and ordinances saying that.
Well, I understand
cities
that
have
part.
to
I'm
allow
not,
them.
I'm not quite sure what qualifies as an ADU, to be honest with you.
An accessory dwelling unit, think of an accessory dwelling unit as, you've heard of the term mother-in-law apartment
Yes.
or guest house? Okay, so
Granny flat.
it would be a smaller structure, typically designed, it's accessory to the main structure, but it is specifically designed
Okay.
for human habitation. People will live in it. As opposed to, you heard the term accessory dwelling unit, that's a separate structure that's secondary to the primary, but it's not intended or designed for people to live in it. An ADU will typically have, or will be required to have, things like kitchens, bathrooms, bedrooms,
They have
all
their
that
own
meet
plumbing.
Oregon building code, whereas an accessory dwelling or an accessory structure doesn't have any of that. So think of it as ADU, small space for people to live that meets all building code
I
requirements.
understood the concept. I was just trying to understand the need for it, because I look at most lots in the city, and I don't see where an 800-foot unit's going to fit on them.
It may, and the unit that
Yeah,
could be built
at the
there might not be.
legislative level, the state level, and on page 2 at the top is the state's definition of what an ADU is. Again, page 2 is the staff report at the top, and so it's quoting some of what House Bill 2001 says, and it says, as used in this subsection, meaning a subsection of the bill, accessory dwelling unit means an interior, attached or detached residential structure that is used in connection with or that is accessory to a single-family dwelling. So
they
typical
still need
with
some functionality from the main.
yeah, you need a primary structure, and the standards that the bill set forth is that ADUs, well, when cities are required to allow ADUs, they're required to allow them on land that is zoned residential, so you don't have to allow, although you could, but you don't have to allow them on industrial land or commercial land or public land. And then it has to be with a residential zone, and the, oh, I forget, there's another one or two things in there, but the legislature tried to say statewide we got a housing shortage, statewide we have an affordable housing problem. What can we do to increase the supply of housing? What can we do to have that housing affordable? And so this concept of mother-in-law apartment or granny flat has been around for a long time.
Foot square facility, or can it be like what they're talking about
It
now?
says 800 square feet or less.
Or less.
It's
okay.
the square footage of this accessory dwelling is going to be derived from or based on the
So-
square footage of the
So
primary
possibly
dwelling.
we could have those little mini homes on properties here in Lafayette.
A mini home would be, if it's portable, that
No,
would fall.
It would have to be a,
That would call, that would be in the category of like a manufactured home, that wouldn't be allowed. So a mini home
well,
couldn't, it would
that's
have to be out of.
another question, but I'll leave that for his part.
So
Question
the state,
about that.
at their state level, they set the direction, and then in Oregon, there's this thing about home rule and local control, where cities and counties like to say, hey, you know, we're real legal entities, we should be able to do what we want. But then the state says, yeah, but the state has authority and only certain things are available for cities and counties to do. And so there's that constant tension between cities and counties versus the state. So the state, in this case, said, here's what we call an ADU, and we'll leave it up to the cities to decide what the reasonable standards are that relate to design and siting of an ADU on a property. And certainly the legislature knew that there's thousands of lots all over the state and cities where they're like 5,000 square feet. There's a single family dwelling on it. There's no room in the front, no room on the side, no room in the back. Well, okay, they're not gonna have an ADU, although an ADU could be a converted basement. It could be a filled in, filled out, whatever you wanna call it, attic. It could be a wing of the house that just isn't used anymore. Add a kitchenette, put in a bathroom,
So
it's an ADU. So there's a lot of options and flexibility.
That's kind of where I was wondering.
Yeah, and so
What
at
is
the local
actually
level,
considered an ADU. Thank
some
you.
cities have virtually no standards for ADUs, and other cities have a lot of standards for ADUs. But yeah, there's, I don't know, 80% of the lots in Lafayette probably just, you can't fit an ADU in there.
Okay. So, shall we move on to testimony from our audience that is here? And when you provide testimony, either stand up or just state your name and address for the record so that we know who's providing the information. If you would, please. Thank you. So if you are, let's go this way, if you are for or want to make comment that is towards or in support of ADUs and what we're doing, would appreciate your input.
I don't want to go on record yet, but I don't understand what any input would be on a state is, you're just accepting and adopting what the state is doing. So where's the, I don't see any need for input.
Yes, we have to adopt what the state is in, but something that you have to say or some piece of information you say, who knows, that might have an influence on development code in a way that is unforeseen or unexpected at this time, yet still supports the statewide goals.
No comment.
Okay. No, that's fair. Thank you.
Well, I really don't want to go on record. Maryland Law 1133 Bridge Loop, but there are a lot of seniors such as myself out here that probably would love to have an ADU. And where I came from, the city would not allow them unless you had a private access and a private parking place, and it was very hard to have an ADU. And I know that there are areas in this city where an ADU could be attached, it could be a garage converted, it could be a lot of different things. So I think that it's important with the housing crisis we have and the cost of housing that the city seriously consider this.
And could you give your address again?
1133 Bridge Loop.
Which loop?
Bridge.
Oh,
Bridge Loop.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And as you can probably see from the comments already, that it's a matter of Lafayette adopting into our code how we handle ADUs, and the fact that it's a very narrow scope. Certain concerns are removed, and we don't want to put an undue burden on those people that might choose to build ADUs. At the same time, we want to make sure that there is some nominal guidance how these things might be built, so
As there should be.
so that everything is complementary as opposed to too contrasting. Okay. Well then, let's do this. Any further public comment? And thank you very much for being here. We appreciate it. Let's go to comments by commissioners at this point in time.
I said it a few years ago when we were looking at the ADU code, and I'll say it again, that I fully support these less restrictive standards.
Doesn't sound like it's a matter of like support it or not. It has to be done.
Well, as worded, I mean, as it's been worded now, and
Well,
and amended.
it sounds like the wording is correct, but it meets a state law,
Mhm.
which is
Yes.
passed, so that that's a no-brainer, that part of it has to be agreed on. And then, like Michael said, I saw some things in here that were confusing, and talking with Jim earlier, I brought up one of my concerns is it's just a matter of interpretation. So it sounds like the first part can be done at this meeting, and go ahead and submit it to the city council to
Go towards, let this document flow.
and then we can start
Forward.
what Jim said is start another, what did you call it?
Well, it's a process to amend the language in the development code.
So that as the
Process
development, once
to
the
amend it
development
so
code
it can be
language.
clarified, and some of those minor discrepancies can be removed in.
That will flow through to.
We're trying to get rid of the major ones that were legally required to remove, correct?
We're trying to remove the roadblocks as far as what's legally required, that's primary, but at the same time, the language that has already been outlined as before, it's to make sure that the language that's currently there sets just a few touch points as far as what would be required of a ADU. If someone were to apply for an ADU tomorrow, well, okay, assuming city council approves this, probably a couple of months from now, but new standards, let's assume this does become the new standard. It sets a few touch points so that whoever's building said ADU would know how they could proceed, what they would have to include, and then what's a blank slate, what's wide open.
And I might point out, just because we have some new members, the planning commission that adopted these standards however many years ago, well, there's three people, I guess, that are the same people on the commission, but with new people, then there can be a change of opinion. Same thing with the city council. The council members that were on council whatever it was, 7 or 8 years ago now.
Some of them are still there.
And the city, I might mention, didn't allow ADUs. And then, as part of all things of our downtown design standards, one of the issues was, and we have some land on 99W that's zoned R3, so that's a RC, residential commercial, it's a mixed zone, and because it allows residences, then it would have fallen under this, but as part of that downtown design standard work, one of the things that came up is, well, if we allowed in some way additional residential units near our downtown area, then that would make it easier for residences to be closer, then they could just walk to a store instead of having to drive to a store. And so the city at that time adopted or allowed ADUs in the RC zone with standards. And at that point there was no state guidance because the bill in 2017 that required all cities over 2,500 to allow ADUs had not yet been passed. And so we have some standards that are, I don't know, something like 8 years old now. Anyway, and so the council could have different, well, it does have different people with different opinions. The commission has different people that could have different opinions. And so once we take care of a motion to recommend the council approve this and move it on to them for a hearing, assuming from your discussion tonight, it looks like the planning commission would want to pass a motion to initiate a review of the other ADU standards. And who knows, but some of them, several of them, you could decide to just delete and recommend that council approve that, or change some, maybe keep them all, but change them. And so that's the process. And if you're looking in the code, like Michael's done, there's, and this, sorry for being bureaucratic, but there's 4 general types of land use actions. Type 4 is where you're amending the language of the comp plan or the comp plan map, amending the language of the zone code or the zone map. And those kinds of changes can be initiated by city staff, the planning commission, or the council. So tonight, you would be following the authority given to you in the type 4 process, and you would initiate an amendment to the development code language.
Okay.
I'm not sure that any of us is prepared for that. I mean, it takes a little bit of time to deliberate on any changes other than what is required by the state. But maybe a work session would be appropriate to go through it and research it and talk about it and hash it out and all that kind of stuff to find out what's going on.
Well,
To sit here cold.
Correct.
Right.
I'm not cold. I know where my problems are.
Well, that's why I suggested earlier that you would initiate the process tonight, and then we'd come back in January for a work session and talk about the ADU standards. That would give people 2 months to think about it, for them to look at the standards and get some ideas to what they think about them. Try to imagine how those standards play out in the real world when somebody says, I want to add an ADU, and whether it's a basement conversion or an attic conversion or a main floor or a second floor or a detached dwelling unit, a small detached dwelling unit, how do these standards play out? And are they, and because accessory dwelling units is a type of housing that is by law needed housing, are these clear and objective standards? And if they're not,
Is the ADU definition for the city of Lafayette in this book?
Yes.
yeah,
See, now I just
in the
got to grab it
definition
and
section,
think through it,
the definition of ADU in the development code is in the definition section.
Yeah, page 37.
And it's
No, I'm
basically
kidding.
and it's basically the same definition as the state law. That way the city won't get, when you have a definition in state law, it is what it is. And then the city gets it and they say, oh, well, we're going to have language that's a little different. Oh, well, okay, how helpful is that when you get to a point where somebody's raising a fuss, and if there's whatever, worst case scenario, an appeal to LUBA, and the city definition is not consistent or not the same as the state definition, okay, well then that's another thing for an appellant to pick at. And so the definition in our code is the same language as the definition in the state law.
So my thoughts on this would be, the hearing's open. It sounds like all of our testimony is done. I would say let's close the hearing at this point in time. And my thought is as follows. I would move that the Planning Commission adopt the staff report and recommend the City Council approve the proposed amendments with respect to public hearing LA 2021-01, accessory dwelling units, at this point tonight.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Did we get a second?
I second.
Yes.
Oh,
Second.
okay.
So, aye. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so we'll then prepare documentation to let City Council know what we want, that we're giving our blessing to, for them to move forward with it. At the same time, it sounds like we want to initiate a review of the development code with respect to ADUs so that that can be discussed. City Council can do the thing, assuming that they approve as well, it goes into the development code. Then if we come around and we might get done and there might be no changes whatsoever. It might just stand. But if those get rolled forward, then City Council and the city will take care of and then remove, subtract, clean up language based upon both us and City Council.
And one thing, even though it's another procedural aspect, typically when you send a notice in to the Oregon Department of Land Conservation, letting them know you're going to be changing your land use rules, the notice should include things that you're gonna be changing. Similarly, with a quasi-judicial hearing where you're taking existing law in your code and applying it to a development application, in your notice to surrounding owners, and if required, a notice in the newspaper, it too is supposed to indicate what you're doing.
And when does that need to be submitted though?
Yeah, and
Because if
so,
we're just, right now, from what I get, me and Michael both have questions that we won't resolve, but
well,
it's not as though
yeah, what
we're
I,
committing ourselves to them either though,
Well,
correct?
correct. You're not committing yourselves to
We
it.
just want to discuss it.
yeah,
Correct. It will
So
be
there's
discussed.
there's nothing that we're submitting
Right,
anything beyond
there-
ourselves.
yeah, and I'm just kind of giving you some background with this thing about notice, just so you have it in your mind, that,
But after we,
well, if I can finish, whether it's legislative or quasi-judicial, the notice is supposed to give people who read it a good idea as to what's proposed. And so then if you get into the meat of it, let's say like tonight you're at the hearing and you said, yeah, we're bound and determined, we want to delete 4 or 5 of these. Well, okay, you didn't put that in the notice, and so you really can't do that because people who might have wanted those things kept didn't know they were proposed to be deleted, and they wouldn't show up. And so it's that due process from the U.S. and Oregon constitutions. When government's making these decisions, government's supposed to have this process that allows people, citizens, to participate in the process. And if the notice says we're going to do X, and then at the hearing you do Y and Z, oh, well, a lot of people didn't show up because they didn't know you were going to do Y and Z, so they didn't have an opportunity to speak their piece. So, you know, as part of this work session, what I would suggest is, in terms of getting ready for it, other than what I've mentioned before about individually, you can read the code, see what the ADU standards are, kind of make up your own mind as to what questions you might have, or if you think something needs to be changed. You could email me what your concerns are, and then for the staff report for the January meeting, anybody that had any concerns and wanted the other members to know prior to the work session what those concerns are, let me know. I'll put them in the staff report. The staff report comes out a week prior to the meeting, and then everybody can know what everybody's thinking without having to wait for the night of the work session to figure out if anybody has any concerns.
So the work session, the whole purpose behind the work session is to make sure everybody's on the same page. Then if we are truly going to go down and change the development code, it would be at that point in time that we'd say, hey, we want to initiate the following. We wouldn't initiate tonight, we would initiate it at that point in time.
You would initiate the process tonight.
Okay.
And that way, because if you don't initiate it tonight, then there isn't going to be anything on the agenda come January about ADU standards.
But when do we need to give a notice to the community so that we can get their input?
Well,
So
that won't happen until we have some language for the community to review.
Okay.
It's kind of one of those chicken and
That's
egg
why I'm
things.
asking you, because you seem to know the
Yeah.
process here.
And so we'll have the work session, and it may take you 2 or 3 work sessions, who knows? Or it may take you only 15 minutes in January.
Well,
But-
you were talking to me earlier about when I first came in. When does this become more of a, I can't remember the terms you used.
Quasi-judicial versus legislative?
Yeah, when does it become one or the other?
Well, in the Planning Commission training materials, and I guess you just got yours tonight, one of the items is about quasi-judicial versus legislative.
Mhm.
And the basic difference is you have a legislative process when you're making law. You have quasi-judicial process when you're implementing law. So when you're making law, you're either making new law, like a new regulation or a new policy in the comp plan or something, or you're changing one that's there already. And the reason for the difference is the legislative process is not very prescriptive. In fact, in state law, nowhere does it say what the legislative process is. Quasi-judicial, on the other hand, is quite prescriptive, and that's where you have existing law, like subdivision regulations in your code. Somebody would turn in a subdivision application, and the planning commission, through the help of staff with a staff report and everything, you'd be concluding whether or not each of the approval criteria written down in the development code have been met.
What's already here.
Existing
But
law.
What we're talking about is.
Well, existing
addressing
law being applied to a development application, and the quasi-judicial part is, ORS 197-763, for example, says you have to send out a notice of the hearing for a quasi-judicial process at least 20 days prior to the hearing to all the owners of property within 100 feet. That gives them roughly 3 weeks to bone up and call staff, find out what's going on, get copies of the application so they can read it and that kind of thing.
And what we're looking at from tonight's perspective, in terms of like initiating changes to the comp plan, that all follows the path of a legislative process, because we're not,
Yeah.
Well,
we're
I
creating the
wanted-
law,
so-
we're modifying, but we're not applying it at
My query
this
to him
point in
is
time.
when would we need to notify the community that we're looking at that?
Right, and so the quasi-judicial is pretty prescriptive. It says you gotta notify people, owners of property within 100 feet of the subject property at least 20 days prior. And then going back to the legislative, and I just mentioned, the state law doesn't say what the legislative process requires. It's up to each local government to figure that out.
Well,
And so what this code says is, and I again apologize because I have 6 cities and I haven't committed every one of those development codes to memory, but
you have to look at page 36.
we need to send out a notice, like prior to the city council hearing, in the newspaper. We don't have to notify any specific owners of property, because what we're doing here affects, I don't know what, 1,000 different
affects the
properties in
community.
town. And so through having the planning commission packet materials available on the website and the minutes and those kinds of things, that's another way for people to find out that something is proposed. And I guess, I'm not sure what all the city does, but there's,
They post it on.
Yeah, they post it.
City
Yeah.
website. And they
And
also
so-
have
A week or
community
more in
page.
advance.
There's
Yeah.
4 places in town that we post it publicly. It's always outside of our reader board right here, at the post office, on the public board. People's Market has a public board, as well as the Carniceria Bastos. I don't know that it's really written, but it's always just been standard. So they get posted to those 4 places, as well as the city website. And then, of course, all of their packets are always available here at City Hall if needed too.
Yeah. So once we get through the work session phase and we know what language we think we're really going to propose be amended, at that point we'd say, okay, when would the planning commission hearing occur? And we have to send that 35-day notice into DLCD 35 days ahead of the planning commission hearing. So we'd have to have a planning commission hearing like 2 months out, so that we can have that proposed language go to DLCD 35 days prior to the first hearing.
So if everything were, let's assume everything were, all language is finalized in January, it would be, April would be the soonest that one would have a hearing, to make sure that you cover
Well, we could
35 days.
have a planning commission hearing in March, because that would be 60 days after
March.
January.
I was
And yeah,
thinking-
that would give us
yeah.
the time to do the 35-day notice.
Yes.
Is it
And-
required for the commission to notify the city council that we're looking at something that may change language, that may require them to get involved in part of the process, especially if it's gotta go to some other governing organization?
I don't think there's anything in the Lafayette Code that says the planning commission has to notify the council, but just through standard operating procedures with the staff, if the planning commission initiates something, then at probably a work session with the city council, one of the items mentioned by the city administrator would be Oh, and by the way, the planning commission has initiated a process to amend the development code related to the accessory dwelling unit standards. We don't have a date for the city council hearing for that, but it'll be coming up in 2 or 3 or 4 months, just to kind of give them a heads up that something's coming their way. And then, for those that don't care, that's fine. For those that do care, they can talk to the city manager and find out more about it, or they can start following the packets on the planning commission and what's posted on the website.
And there's nothing,
and end up knowing as much or more than the planning commissioners.
And there's nothing that would prevent or say that, hey, we've notified them that this is what we're like. There's nothing that says that we couldn't invite them and create a joint work session with them.
That's true for religious.
Depending upon how curious they are or how invested they want to be, would be a good thing if they wanted to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and for a legislative process, that's okay to invite the council. Some councils just say, no, that's planning commission function, we don't want to get in your way, you do your job and let us know through the normal process what you're proposing to amend. Other councils, they may have, a couple of real housing advocates, and they'd be happy to attend a planning commission meeting, even though they've got plenty of city council meetings on their agenda already. And so it just kind of depends.
Yeah.
Typically, I guess in my experience, planning commissions are not or do not have city councilors attend to find out what they think about some amendments. I don't know why that is, but it just seems as though a lot of city councilors like to stay in their city council realm and let the planning commission do their thing within their set, the step-by-step standards as to how to get things up to council. Typically, if you have a historic committee, councilors aren't jumping in there and trying to give their opinion and influencing and kind of dictating what they think a historic committee should do. Or if you have any other kind of committee related to land use things, often the city councilors are not in there trying to dictate and influence people. So,
well then, by all means, we'll initiate a review of the development code. So let city know. And then I guess the next thing on the agenda is our next meeting will be on January 20th.
If you want to initiate that tonight, pass a motion.
Okay, I'll make a motion that I'll make a motion that we initiate a change to the development code with respect to ADUs.
Or a review, not a change.
It'll be a review that may lead to a change.
I would second that.
All in favor?
Who seconded
Aye.
that?
George.
Thank you, George.
All
Whatever my name is.
And all in favor. It was unanimous.
Yes.
Okay.
Just a little mechanical thing.
Yes.
Again, if any of you, once you've read through it, if you want to call me or email me and ask questions and so forth, please do. If you want to just send me an email saying, these are my concerns, please include them in the January staff report to the Planning Commission, then do that. Or if you're just wanting to not have your thoughts out there early, you can wait until the January work session and talk about it orally at the work session.
I have one question.
Yes.
Is it possible to get a copy of it? Because I know some of these can be really long and.
Did you got your binder, right, Joe?
No.
What?
A
Okay,
copy
well,
of
I've
what?
got it for you. I've got one for you.
Oh, okay,
guys.
thank you. Okay, because I was like, that's a lot of printer ink.
Probably a fair question.
So, a copy of what?
Oh, the code.
The zoning and development ordinance.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Yeah, the actual ADU standards are in the staff report tonight.
That's the full thing? I thought it was just a part of it.
No, the
Oh.
city has accessory dwelling unit standards, And whether a person were to put an ADU in the R1,
Right,
R2,
right, right,
or
right.
RC zone, they would look to those standards, and that would be
I just
what they need
didn't
to
realize
follow.
that that was it in the entirety. I thought maybe there
Mhm.
was more
No.
that wasn't. Okay. Okay.
Okay. So then, that certainly needs work session on January 20th.
And I won't be here.
Oh, you won't be here?
Be in
Well,
Mexico.
Yeah, having fun, thanks. Just taunt us that way, why don't you? Ah. So then if you do have concerns or thoughts or
So,
anything
yeah,
like that,
I'll
by
look
all
at it
means,
ahead
get
of
them to
time.
Jim so he can then
Okay.
filter them out to us. That way you're,
Okay.
you know, we need all the brain power we can get. Okay, well, then that's,
Well,
everything. Go ahead, Jim.
one thing that you may not be aware of is Mike and I at the beginning decided to put in like a 6B that is an update of what the city council decided regarding the fence variance. Usually, things that the planning commission decides don't get appealed to the council, and so there's no follow-up because there's no decision beyond your planning commission decision. But in this case, your decision to approve the fence variance, allowing that fence at the same location that it originally was when the people bought the property. That was appealed by the applicant because they wanted that fence to enclose a little bigger area.
Correct.
Along the side of their house next to Adams Street. So, at the planning commission hearing, the planning commission affirmed your decision, and basically...
That's the city
City.
council meeting.
The city
Pardon?
council.
Did I misspeak?
Yeah.
City
City
council
council.
affirmed your decision, and there was several councilors who, as my understanding of what all was going on, they could see what the regulation was. They could see that the variance application really didn't justify, for that situation, allowing something different. And at the same time, they really didn't like the fence regulation for side yards adjacent to a street, where the maximum fence height is 2.5 feet, or excuse me, 3.5 feet.
3 feet.
It sounded like several of them were thinking it would be okay for a 6-foot high fence to come, in the case of this applicant, farther south along their side property line adjacent to Adams Street. And so that is
Another
a
code
thing
to
that
look at.
they charged the planning commission with, to review the fence standards in a yard adjacent to a street, in effect corner lot
Corner lots.
situations. They didn't have a problem with the corner lots having a front yard with a 3.5-foot fence height restriction. But over on the second front yard, the side yard adjacent to the street, they wanted that fence height regulation reviewed. And so that will be a second item on your January agenda. And basically, because we know what this specific thing is, how it played out at the Planning Commission and played out at the Council, what I'll have is, of course, the current language and some discussion, and then I will make a leap of faith jump, and if you want to recommend the Council make a change, I will show a proposed change, and what it would be is, in those side yards, instead of a 6-foot, or instead of a 2.5-foot height limit, it would be 6 feet. And as you're driving around town, take a look at some corner lots and just kind of visualize a fence on the side yard adjacent to a street that's 3.5 feet high. Well, what would it look like if it was 6 feet?
And that's
And
side
so-
yard, side yard in a corner lot specifically.
Yep, corner lot.
Corner lots.
Because you don't have a side yard adjacent to a street unless it is a corner lot.
Not being here for that session,
That's true.
what, they were trying to get the fence moved from a different line than it already was. They
Yeah,
wanted to
it's,
include more of their property in the fence.
They
Yeah,
put a
it's-
fence
They put a fence
past
over
their, they put a
8
fence past their property line, in,
Well, they
But that's
they-
not what we were
that-
talking
no,
about
no,
because
no,
they
that-
agreed
that's-
to move
The
it.
little
That wasn't a
complication
part
I
of what
had,
we were
the
talking
fence
about.
contractor accidentally, if you will, built the fence not on the property line, the side yard adjacent to the North Adams Street right-of-way. He built it about 15 feet out into the right-of-way.
So he changed that.
Our roads are really screwed in
And
this town,
so,
let's face it.
anyway, that was noticeable to the city, so they contacted the owner and said, hey, you gotta move your fence in. And, oh, by the way, when you move it in on your side yard, on your property line, in the side yard adjacent to the street, it can be no higher than 2.5 or 3.5 feet.
3.
And so they requested a variance to
They
allow
replaced
6
one
feet.
fence, they wanted to raise it up to 8 feet, and then they wanted to
6.
enclose
6.
the side yard also, which extended out into the right of way.
Well, they bought the
their
house with a
contractor
6-foot fence.
inadvertently, shall we say.
I'm not distinguishing between contractor and owner, I'm just saying that that's what happened.
Yeah. what
Right,
happened
so
is-
the end result of this is that city council says, hey, planning commission, we think these side yard fence height things need to
But
be
was there a
looked at
fence
again, so
inside
they're
the
kicking it to
facility?
us to go through it.
When they bought the property, there was an old rickety fence on the side yard next to Adams Street.
Was it
And-
within their property?
But it was
on the
6
property
feet.
line.
So
And
it was a legal fence as far as where
Well,
it's located.
Yes.
Where it was located was legal, it was just 6 feet high. And apparently, whenever it was 20, 30 years ago, when the house was built, the fence was built at 6 feet in height instead of 3.5, and nobody said anything. And so when they bought the house and there was this rickety fence, they were just gonna replace it. And they were gonna do 6 feet, and all of a sudden it was like, no.
That house is only 10 years old, maybe
Oh.
12. It's not 30 years old.
Okay, I'm sorry.
I don't have a.
Whatever the age of the house, the fence was there, they bought it, they thought the fence was legal, and they were just simply gonna replace it. The little wrinkle, the weird wrinkle, is that the contractor built it like 15 feet out into the right of way. But anyway, so the issue was, could they have their rebuilt fence 6 feet high? The commission said, yeah, as long as it's right where it was. And they said, well, yeah, but we want to extend it, have more of our yard enclosed with that 6 foot high fence.
But it wasn't their yard that they weren't wanting to enclose.
No, it was.
It is.
Yeah, it was their
But
yard.
they wanted to put the fence in a location so it would still enclose their yard, just more of it. But because of how the code regulations are currently written with regard to fence height, that's
confused.
triggers it.
Well, Don Laird built a house, so, you know, and everyone knows Don Laird.
No.
Okay, well, he used to be mayor here, and he owns half the town. He owns most of these businesses along 99. So when Don Laird built it, I don't know if he built it illegally or not, but in any case, the house is only about 10, 12 years old. It's a brand new house. And again, Don Laird built it, who knows our city's codes and policies, et cetera. So
Well,
I think you're misrepresenting
Well, the
this
house
property.
the house isn't the issue, it's the fence.
Well, I understand that, I'm just
And,
saying,
you know, whether they
if they-
had their fence contractor and said, we want you to build it way out there by the pavement, or whether the contractor, I mean, whatever, but
that's on the
it's not the point
contractor.
of
May I
a
ask
city
a
staff
question?
member to
Please.
cast
This is-
negativism
may-
on something that a citizen has done in the city.
Hey, Jim?
They requested a variance, the planning commission approved most of what they wanted, but not everything. So they appealed it to the council to try to get everything they wanted. And the council affirmed the planning commission decision. So they're able to rebuild their fence where the old fence was.
Okay.
But many of the council members said, we need somebody to take a look at these fence regulations.
So
And so that's what the planning commission is tasked with for
Not this
January.
not this particular case anymore. It's
That's
about
what I was trying to
It's about our
explain.
fence, it's about our fence
Fence code.
regulations as they exist and the fact that they want this to be reviewed. So that'll be on our next
Yeah, it's
meeting.
unfortunate that the fence that was built ended up way out in the right of way, because that confused everybody.
You have a question?
Yes, Was there a permit issued by or for the contractor to build the fence?
No, there was not. Neither the owner nor the contractor contacted the city to even ask if the city had a fence.
And that's because, oh, not
They
true.
did. They were informed that if they were replacing same height, location, and material, a permit is not required.
And so when it ended up, in a new location, that triggered it. So when it ended up in a new location, that triggered this
A
whole ball of
complaint
wax.
triggered everything.
Okay.
And when they
So,
raised the height.
yes.
So, okay, so I'm going to make a motion that we adjourn.
You might check to see if anybody has any last item.
Well, okay. Any last items? You're chomping at the bit?
I have a question, like I always do. Is there any kind of formal communication that happens between city council when they've got a request or a mandate, a demand or whatever of the planning commission, so that the planning commission can read accurately what they're asking us to do?
Well, the minutes of the city council meeting are available. I don't know how detailed those minutes are. Some cities have what they call abbreviated minutes.
So no.
And so those minutes, in this case, might say, the city council tasked the planning commission to review the fence height regulation in a side yard adjacent to a street.
But it's not up to the commission to have to go back and search through minutes to find out.
Well,
if
won't
they've
it
got
come
a-
on our
Well, that's
agenda
why I brought it
packet?
up tonight.
Jim notified us tonight, so
That's why I brought it up tonight.
That's why he brought it up.
That's
So
the
there's
standard
our,
operating procedure is to...
there's our operating procedure
And there
notification.
aren't, like I mentioned, very many things where the planning commission makes a decision and then it goes up to the council on appeal, and then the commission waits to see what the council did. And so I'm not every meeting telling you things about what's happening at the council, because there aren't things related to planning happening at the council that haven't already come through you that you wouldn't be aware of. But in this case, there was the appeal. The appeal's been decided. And so now at your next meeting, after the planning commission decision, I'm letting you know what happened, and that in this case, they went a step beyond merely affirming your decision. They said, planning commission, help us out here, take a look at this requirement for fence. And so...
That's where my question came in, because you kind of confused me with that, because I thought you were talking for this particular case only, not for the whole.
No. Yeah, this would apply to the city.
Yeah, when I
So
say...
that's what I wanted to understand.
Yeah, when the city council, or when I say the city council has asked the commission to take a look at the fence height regulation, that is the city's regulation for fence heights anywhere in the city on a corner lot that has a side yard adjacent to a street.
Oh, there's a lot more issues in fences.
Okay. I'll do it this way. Are we ready for a motion to adjourn?
Yes.
Okay, I make a motion that we adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you.
So what part of Gresham?
Thank you.
I lived, well, I grew up Walter's Hill.
Time.
That's where I was raised.
You come
Walter's
back.
Hill, and then
Yes.
my last house, I lived over in the Hollydale area, and then my last house was off of